So all that happened on Friday, which was bad enough, down 30% in a day. No
Right.
rest for the weary. Fast forward to Monday, and then the company had to report earnings in the wake of this.
Right.
Everything was up and to the right. Revenue was up 95%. Profits up about 2,000% from obviously a low base. I think it went from 1 million to 20 million. And then as well for 2025, management dropped huge guidance. Revenue was set to grow 59% year over year. However, here's where the huge caveat comes. 725 million of that revenue, about 30%, was falling under its weight loss division. This episode of the pod is proudly sponsored by Cadiz Inc. It trades on the NASDAQ under the ticker CDZI. Cadiz is a transformative water resource company that is making a significant impact with its $5 billion in water assets and $173 million in cash. The company is currently constructing a massive water pipeline, the largest in the Southwest, which is designed to ensure reliable water access for the region. Cadiz is actively combating the water crisis with game-changing infrastructure projects and strategic partnerships. Under the leadership of visionary CEO Susan Kennedy, who previously served as Chief of Staff to Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger, Cadiz is set to provide innovative solutions and substantial value to both its shareholders and the communities it serves. Always doing your own research before making any investment decisions. The information provided here is for informational purposes only and should not be considered financial advice. Emmet, how are we getting on?
Morning, Mike. How are you today?
I'm good. Would you believe this is the 250th Stock Club episode?
Oh my goodness. And we still haven't said anything original. I didn't know that. I was trying to think the other day, I reckoned we're at about 220, but the 250, well, I tell you one thing, as I'm sure you'll relate to, there's no way a podcaster after 250 episodes would dare listen to their first few episodes. It's just,
oh my God.
It's an embarrassing. It's just, oh God, a car crash in slow motion. I couldn't bear to listen to it. I couldn't bear to listen to the last one I was on, let alone the first one I was on.
It's nothing worse than listening to your own voice. I actually remember the first time I was on this podcast. It was obviously already well established by that time, and I came in for like 5 minutes, and all I remember was like, So yeah, hopefully
you learned the hard way you learned the hard way the importance of preparation. Meanwhile, our listeners are going, you prepare. So
that's very true as well. Yeah. I wonder, I feel bad for them if there's one person out there that's listened to all 250, please do write in, because
please,
they've seen a serious progression of, I don't know what you'd call it. I don't know if I'd call it talent, but a progression of something anyway.
And if you're any of the hosts' moms, you don't count.
my family have stopped listening to this quick, don't worry.
Oh, good. That's great. We're losing them one at a time. Yeah, that would actually be really interesting. Has anybody listened to all 250 episodes? And that is not a challenge. Please don't listen to the early ones. I'm actually getting embarrassed. But it just goes to show, like, stick with something through thick and thin, no matter what, and eventually you'll get okay at it.
The goal is mediocrity.
What a motivational speech that was.
We might climb that mountain eventually.
Yeah, exactly. It's like doing the Leaving Cert. Just keep at it. Oh God, just keep studying that subject you detest, and eventually you'll be all right at it.
Eventually you might get a B3. That was me. That was me for French, actually, would you believe? And I'm still living in France now. How bad is that?
And how's your fluency coming along? Are you nearly there?
No, not nearly there. It's getting there. It's getting better. I'm better at saying what I want to say, but my ear is awful. When people speaking at full speed, it doesn't even go in one ear and out the other. I can't even get it to go in, but it's coming along.
Well, look, not to hijack it entirely about your French, but I've been going at French for years through the Irish public school system, and then I took a 20-year break, and then I went to Duolingo, and I currently have a 1,400-day streak or something like that. I haven't missed it once for 350 days, but it was the book you recommended to me and the resource.
French Conversations.
Yes.
Paul Noble one. Yeah, it's good, isn't
Paul Noble. It is brilliant because this guy basically starts by speaking at, in his own words, lightning speed. So there's a conversation between two French natives at lightning speed, and they break it down, as you well know, Mike. And explain it to you really slowly, and then you have to say it back to him and say it back to him again, all on a podcast,
Yeah.
and say an audiobook over and over and over. And then when he plays at lightning speed after
You
about
actually
20
pick it
minutes,
up. Yeah.
you pick
We'll
it up.
take we'll take this
Brilliant.
conversation offline, because I don't think this is
Yeah.
why people
Yeah.
tuned in today to learn about
I have my
to
order
hear
book
about
here.
us learning French.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
okay, where do you want to start with today? We've got a few
Well,
stocks to
we have
talk
a
about.
few things. There was a story that caught my attention, which I thought was worth a quick chat about. And I saw some news about what was a stock that for some people was a fortune maker, and for others was a giant splash of red, depending on when they bought. So some lucky duck bought gene sequencing kingpin Illumina in April 2003 for 85 cents per share, and held through to today for $93 a share. So that person who bought whatever it is 22 years ago almost to the day has seen a 110-fold growth in their investment.
Hmm.
However, her less astute twin brother decided to get in on the action in summer 2021 for $460 a share, only to find that they're now down 80%. And I thought that the story of Illumina is an interesting one because it has made a vast fortune for early investors and has given a right thumping to more recent investors. And I just wanted to, I guess, get in under the hood and explain a little bit about the business and to have a debate as to whether or not it's a good investment now.
Sounds good. Yeah, I know the early investor is still happy with its 100 bagger, but I'd say it's reminiscing about 460 a buck,
Oh yeah.
460 a share at the same time.
No matter when you got in, you look at the historical chart and you go, that's when I should have sold, or that's when I should have bought.
Yeah,
All we're
completely.
wizards with the information past, whatever 2020 vision in hindsight. But I'll give the obligatory backstory, Mike, just for our listeners, because Illumina is one of the fortune makers and darlings of the market and a precursor to CRISPR. So it
I
was
was about to
founded.
say 2003 sounds very early, doesn't it?
Oh yeah, it was part of proliferation of gene sequencing stocks, and I think we mentioned it on one of the other 250 podcasts that I was invested in all of them: Illumina, Millennium Pharmaceuticals, Celera. There was a whole bunch of them, and I had bought an equal stake in all of them. And had I just done what I espouse now, which is just hang on to all of them, I would have had 100+ bagger in Illumina, which would have compensated me for the other dogs. But anyway, Illumina was founded in 1998. As were all those other competitors. I think they were all between 95 and 99. There was just this gold rush towards gene sequencing, thanks to a guy called Craig Vettner. But Illumina was founded in 98 in San Diego by 5 dudes with largely unpronounceable names and fairly unmemorable, so I'm not going to try and regurgitate it here. And the goal was to revolutionize genetic research through high throughput sequencing technology. So this was space age stuff back in the late 90s, which, when you remember, we're talking about Google and Facebook and all the internet darlings were barely born at that stage, if at all. So from day one, it was focused on making sequencing faster and more accurate and more affordable, because those 5 founders could see the direction of travel of humanity, and it was a very astute and complex area to go into. And I know our listeners are way smarter than average and already know this stuff. But just in case, gene sequencing is the process of determining the exact order of nucleotides in a DNA molecule, which is necessary for figuring out all things to do with any kind of life form and why it exists the way it does. So it allows scientists to read and analyze genetic information that's basically encoded in all of us. And gene sequencing has absolutely revolutionized biology and medicine by kind of opening the door to these incredible breakthroughs that have probably touched the lives of people you know. So we talk about these things, and when they're less tangible than, let's say, the expansion of Starbucks, where we all saw it in front of our eyes, like what Illumina has delivered to the world has definitely touched the life of you or someone belonging to you, because basically it revolutionized all things to do with drugs and disease prevention and drug development and genetic research and things that are very, very tiny with a huge impact. Now, in the early 2000s, it started to rapidly expand its portfolio because growth wasn't so easy at an organic level back in those days. And so they've acquired all various smaller biotech firms, which I remember very well, in order to strengthen its technological base. And one of its most critical acquisitions was in '07 when it purchased a British company called Celexa. And it developed next generation sequencing, which my dumb head just goes, well, it was like what they were doing, but even better. So they had this NGS, next generation sequencing technology. And it was that acquisition that was pivotal for Illumina. It absolutely shot them to the forefront of the entire industry and in turn allowed them to kind of dominate the global market for sequencing machines, which are basically the things you buy if you're working in Pfizer and you need a gene sequencer. The name that comes to mind is Illumina, and it's delivered to you, and it comes in the shape of a large photocopier or an entire room. If you just want to picture the size of these things. So through the 2010s, it really just powered forward. Illumina just kept growing and growing and growing, and it became the primary supplier of these sequencing machines and reagents, as they're known, in all types of pharmaceutical development. And its platforms, which are known as the HiSec and the MySec and the NovaSec and all these kind of brand names that most listeners, including myself, wouldn't have ever encountered, are the absolute gold standard in genetic research. And when you look at Illumina, just as when I look at CRISPR therapeutics today, which for me really feels and looks like Illumina did in the late 90s, the old philosophy, business philosophy of do something that everybody needs and nobody else can do really fits the bill. Like if you find a business area that's really complex, has barriers to entry, has proprietary technology or licenses or whatever it is, and most people need it, you have a golden ticket. And it's not easy to mine for this golden ticket. But they built something that 99.9% of the world's eyes would glaze over if they had to engage with it or try to develop it. But there was a storm on the horizon, and I'll wrap up this kind of backstory fairly quickly. This aggressive expansion, as it usually does, led to regulatory scrutiny. And one of the company's most controversial moves was an attempt to acquire Grail in September 2020. And it was a startup specializing in liquid biopsy for early cancer detection, which Horizon subscribers will know about thanks to an investment I made in a competitor. And the deal, which was valued at $8 billion, really had massive pushback from regulators in Europe and the US, and the US. There was total pushback here, um, which largely went unnoticed, I think, because we were worrying about other things in September 2020, like our Netflix subscription and lying on the couch. But it led to this huge, big, drawn out legal battle that ultimately forced Illumina to have to flog to sell Grail. So they had really reached the pinnacle of the antitrust lawyers had decided, no, enough is enough. And it cost the company billions, and they had to sell it, and investor confidence started to wane. And that was the beginning of the headaches that our astute investor's twin brother was kind of now going, I think I like this Illumina, I'm going to invest in it. I mean, the acquisition was meant to bolster Illumina's position in the early cancer detection market, but this regulatory resistant, and in fact, the activist investor Carl Icahn opposed opposition, like it was just major roadblocks, and that was kind of the story of Illumina up until, I guess, where we're at today, which is market challenges, increased competition. You could say geopolitical uncertainty, which I guess I'll dive into. And then since the beginning of this year alone, 2025 alone, the stock has dropped by 25% in a short year as it was so far. Anyway, just 2 months long, where most businesses have been benefiting from an optimism that comes with a change of president and that person's policies. And a major factor behind its decline is intensifying competition. Like, listen to this. Illumina had 75% market share in the United States in the sequencing industry, and it supplied research labs and hospitals and pharma companies and anyone, like your mad cousin in his lab at the back of his garden, you name it. They went for Illumina. That was just the name you went for. But like there's more recent advancements and all these competitors popping up because it's very hard to maintain a barrier to entry for very long when you've got massive margins. And Roche came along, MGI, Element Biosciences, they all started to erode its dominance. And then these guys, Roche, have a newly launched sequencing machine, which in particular is seen as a mega threat due to way lower sequencing costs, which I guess is making its products less acceptable. But adding to all of these difficulties, the National Institute of Health, the NIH in America, announced that funding caps on research expenses, potentially impacting Illumina's revenue from government projects, was going to be, there was going to be caps in there, and a judge temporarily blocked the decision. It's just getting very messy.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Everything in the life sciences is getting sold off
It is, yeah.
Since the election.
It's an incredibly fascinating and complex arena to look for stocks to invest in, because it can be something as like once upon a time intuitive surgical was unheard of, and the Da Vinci robot was space age and breakthrough, and now virtually every Western world hospital has an intuitive surgical machine with a razor and blade model, and that's an exciting find, and you want to find something like an intuitive or like an Illumina. But when you look now, there's so many medtech businesses doing something that to the almost expert outsider looks unique, but you don't know what's going on in the back room. Like just the way Roche had this mega machine for sequencing that's going to cost a fraction of Illumina's gold standard.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned the geopolitical stuff there, and I know in general the election of RFK Jr. to the head of National Health and Sciences, something, that spooked an awful lot of investors in pharma, biotech, everything. But this goes beyond just that. This is more to do with the tariff side of things as well. Is that true?
Oh, yeah, definitely. So, I mean, there was an abrupt policy shift between the US and China, as I think everybody has kind of observed. And it's added so much uncertainty to what was already a complicated storyboard for investors. Like earlier this month, China placed Illumina, specifically Illumina, on its list of, quote, unreliable entities, which was a retaliation for Trump's new tariffs. And then a few days later, it faced fresh pressure that I already mentioned from the National Institute of Health, where they put the caps on those research expenses. So since the initial trade conflicts of 2018, China and America have been really on a tit for tat. They've been throwing buns at each other since about 2018. And tariff escalations have happened, and it's targeted specific industries, and pharmaceuticals and technology and biotechnology were at this nearly the epicenter of those kind of those targets, and that's Illumina in a nutshell. It is pharma, it is technology, it is biotechnology. So the latest round of tariffs imposed by President Trump has really escalated tensions between the two countries, and as of earlier this year, the US increased tariffs on all Chinese-made goods by an additional 10%. And then, of course, China are not going to take that lying down. And the country's antitrust regulators have opened an investigation into Google and placed US companies such as Illumina and PVH on its unreliable entities list. And although I'm not entirely certain what that means, it's not a good look. It's not a nice thing. Like, the designation really could limit or ban the companies from trading.
Yeah, it's a lot worse than being on the reliable list,
Yeah, exactly. And like, so I mean, already Illumina, 7% of Illumina's revenue comes from China, and that's been declining, which is quite interesting. So it's been kind of like clicking down quarter after quarter, reported year after year, and that's really due to these increasing restrictions on US biotech firms. So we're looking at it, one of the original gangsters of the gene industry. I don't, you know what I mean by gene industry. There's so many, and it has enjoyed massive returns. But if you look, my obligatory shape of graph conversation, it looks like Snowdonia if you cut it in half and looked at it from the side. So it's just, um, no, Karen Tool. I'm going to go Karen
Okay.
Tool. So the share price graph really was flat, 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 flat for years and years, which is the way growth stocks go. Everybody, don't forget, that's the way you had, like, I mean, Microsoft shareholders sat there and languished for 20 years looking at pennies, and then suddenly the one who was just lazy was seen as the millionaire smart uncle. But Illumina was the same, flat, flat, flat forever, and then it went through this period of mega growth beginning in around 2010, but it just has fallen, fallen, fallen. And so you look at it now and go, is it a good investment? Should I get in on an industry leader? Well, my vote on that question is no, I wouldn't buy Illumina at the moment. There's like the advancements in chipsets and the advancements in AI powered software and decision making is core to what they're doing, but it's core to what everybody else is doing. So I just feel like the glory days of Illumina have come and gone. And will they ever see circa $500 a share again? Perhaps, but I don't think it's going to happen in the medium term. What would you think, Mike?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like that, the just health sciences in general seems like such a touchy subject right now because there's so many questions and there's no real answers. Like no one really knows how U.S. policy is going to affect. We've seen the effects on funding markets already
Mm-hmm.
in terms of government research, but also in terms of private research, which the biotechnology industry was going through anyways post
Mm-hmm.
2022. And it was
Mm-hmm.
kind of creeping back up again, and then the election hit. Look, we don't have a clue what your man RFK Jr. is going to do. He seems seems like a wild card to call it mildly. So there's a lot of quality businesses there that are kind of humming and hawing about which direction they're going to go. But yeah, for now, for an industry as complex as that, which is already tough to decipher, when you add in all these extra factors, it just seems like there's more question marks than answers.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
And
So
that small player that I mentioned that I bought in Horizon, I like more than ever. There's still going the next Illumin is out there.
exactly. There's always going to be gems,
There's always
and
going to be gems.
and
Yeah.
and to be honest, like unless you're in this industry and you really really know your X's and O's, you're gonna have to get a small bit lucky
Oh yeah.
in a sense of oh well, why would Medicare sponsor that company and not this company, and why is this getting endorsed? And there's so many factors beyond the company's control that it kind of needs to fall into. So being able to, like, how are you going to be able to analyze the potential of a genomic testing device
Mm,
as a fella with an accounting degree? Do you know,
mm,
like it
mm.
is, you have to admit that a lot of this is outside of your circle of competence.
You know, you hit the very a very unspoken word in our business, which is lucky. Like, it's that old quote: "I'd rather a lucky general than a brilliant one." Napoleon said it, but I think it's a great one. But you just anyone who has a fortune, good fortune, who discounts luck is lying to themselves and to others. And the same goes for stock investing. Luck plays a big role. Now, we have to remember one of the definitions of luck is when preparation meets opportunity. So, you know, somebody who gets up off their backside and works hard for a degree and then works hard in their career and works and works and works for 20 or 30 years and then ends up with little more than they need. Someone could unlook at them and go, they've been lucky. Yeah, sure. So I don't like say to any investor who's enjoyed success, well, it's all down to luck. You did what you needed to do, but luck did play a role in some of your stocks enjoying the successes they enjoyed. You know, I've spoken way too much about that Netflix investment. I'm super bored about talking about it, but here we go again. But like, I'm only raising it because I was lucky. Of course, I was lucky because you know how many other stocks I bought that year? Loads. I don't even remember. But it's the story now because I still have it. I bought and flogged loads and loads of businesses alongside Netflix. I just happened to accidentally keep them.
Yeah.
Like Mercado Libre is like a darling. The Amazon of Latin America is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. I bought those so long ago and sold them for 2 or 3x my money and thought I was a smart guy. Oh my God, I'd be doing this podcast from my own personal island on Mars if I'd have kept my Mercado Libre.
Yeah.
But like that, it's bad luck I sold. It's good luck I bought, whatever. But luck is such an important role in investing. But as was it Ernie Els said, the more I practice, the
Mhm.
luckier I get. Was it
Gary,
Ernie
Gary,
Els?
Gary Player.
Gary Player. Gary Player.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's it. And that's it. It's just putting yourself in position to get lucky. And that's an
Mm.
awful lot of what individual stock picking is.
Oh, it is. Yeah, it is. I mean, we look at the attributes of great businesses, and we look for businesses today that have the mosaic and the shape of a business that looked great 20 years ago with a modern context, and we buy enough of them, and we will be lucky because
Yeah.
our temperament will set us aside from the crowd, and that's just a fact. So, bringing it back to biotech, I think Illumina now has too many sharks in the water, and I think too many other smaller and actually pretty big businesses have said we're going to take some of those margins because we can do exactly what you're doing, and they are, like Rush. Mike, this is fresh on my mind because we're in the process of rebuilding the Horizon scorecard, which is the scorecard for the service I'm running where I manage my family's pension and savings through the exclusive investment in stocks and shares in the US. And right now, 5 of the 26 stocks I've bought are up 100% or more. And there are no 10 baggers yet, and there are, by association, no 100 baggers yet. But you need a rake of 2 baggers, that's stocks that are up 100% or more, to land a few 10 baggers, and you need a few 10 baggers to land a 100 bagger. So it's a funnel, it's a process that takes a lot of time. Well, I'm dedicated to that pursuit, and we have an offer on Horizon for $499 that is running until Monday, 5 p.m. Irish time. And by joining, you'll get access to the 60 odd stock picks that I've made, the 26 stock portfolio that I own, weekly updates, my buy alerts, and a vibrant community that meets in Dublin once a year and meets every day on the discussion boards. So for that offer, email frank@mywallstreet.com. That's FRANK@MYWALLST.com. What have you got for us?
Yeah, kind of staying in similar waters. It's not biotech, but it's kind of close enough. So Hims and Hers.
Oh yes, interesting. I see a lot of headlines about Hims and Hers at the
Yeah,
moment.
it's been incredibly I don't know, popular stock to talk about anyways. So for those who don't know, it's a telehealth business that it got to start by prescribing erectile dysfunction and hair loss medicines, and has since expanded to a whole range of products for both men's and women's health as well. So that it was originally Hims Health, and then it expanded to Hims and Hers. But where it taken off recently, and we talked about this in the pod last year, was that it started this compounding of semaglutides, which is the active ingredient in weight loss drugs like Ozempic and Wegovy. And by compounding, what we mean is, like, think of it a way like, you know how generic drugs come onto the market after a patent is up for a popular drug. Uh, this is kind of a version of that, where if there is a shortage of a particular drug in the country, the FDA will allow others to make what's called compounded versions, which are kind of like essentially generics, but are able to operate while there's still a patent out there. It's only a very
Oh,
temporary thing.
I did not know that. That is interesting.
Yeah, so Hims is allowed to produce these compounded versions of essentially, so semaglutide, so essentially Ozempic, Wegovy, Mounjaro, which are patent protected by Novo Nordisk
Yeah,
and Eli Lilly.
yeah.
Started it in May of last year, and it's just absolutely taken off in terms of popularity, in terms of stock price, and it makes a lot of sense why. Like, as in Hims and Hers was selling these compounded weight loss drugs for about 200 quid a month. I think if you were going to go to the branded versions, it was about 1,000 quid without insurance.
Oh man.
So it's essentially a big loophole. And under that loophole, the company was just absolutely firing on all cylinders. It even had a Super Bowl ad, which I think will have put it into the mainstream, I suppose, consciousness for a lot of people.
That
And
was in the Super
so,
Bowl just gone.
yes,
All
yeah,
right.
so
Okay.
whatever, a
No,
couple
I
of
didn't
weeks
see
back.
that. Yeah, yeah.
And just following the stock chart alone is kind of nuts. So it set an all-time high around this time last week. And so since Trump got elected, the stock tripled. It was up nearly sevenfold in the 12 months. So say from February
Wow.
2024 to February 2025.
Uh,
And then since last Thursday, the stock basically got hit by a perfect storm, and it's down almost 50% since.
Right.
Well, the inevitable happened essentially, because we're talking about this loophole and this temporary compounding situation. So last Friday, the FDA said the shortage of semaglutide injection products had been resolved, and it'll start taking action against compounders in the next 60 to 90 days.
Oh, I see.
So the stock fell 30% on the day on that news. Obviously, you know, there's an assumption that this was a longer than temporary situation. I think
Yeah.
for a lot of
Yeah.
investors, there was a lot of excitement there, and because these drugs were so popular, it
Yeah.
felt like it could go the shortage per se could go much longer than
Mm.
expected.
Mm.
And the him CEO Andrew Dullum, which I was doing my research on this, and I thought it sounded exactly like the Netflix intro. Dudum. But
Oh, if you meet him, you've got to say that.
it's it's probably
You're the Netflix guy, right? Oh,
it's
that's
probably
funny.
his next job. But he said, I'm reading his quote here. He said, now that the FDA has determined the drug shortage for semaglutide has been resolved, we will continue to offer access to personalized treatments as allowed by law to meet their patient needs. We're closely monitoring potential future shortages, as Novo Nordisk stated 2 weeks ago that it will continue to have capacity limitations and expected continued periodic supply constraints and related drug shortage notifications.
Mm.
So that tells you a lot there where, okay, maybe the easy money is off the table for now, but he's kind of implying don't rule it out just yet, because they've invested an awful lot of money into the production of these the compounded treatments.
Yeah.
They set up plants all across America to kind of meet this demand that was there, and obviously they've gone and created demand as well because they're
Yeah.
selling them at 20% of the price. So they've given access to a new group of people who were maybe didn't have it under their insurance or didn't have health insurance. Obviously, couldn't afford $1,000 a month, but they could afford
Mm.
$200 a month.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, and just in terms of hims and hers as well, they were in the weight loss drug game before this compounding opportunity arose. Do you know what I mean? And they still have their own developments beyond just the compounded semaglutides. They recently as well acquired a peptide startup. So it's not just going to abandon plans in the
Uh,
area, but
what's a peptide? Sorry, remind me. Is that like antacid? What's a peptide?
it's not just these kind of magic preventative drugs, essentially. So
Oh.
they really become popular in terms of, we'll say, like optimizing health.
Oh,
It's a
I see.
big thing in certain subcultures, I suppose. I actually, I shouldn't be saying this on the air, but my friend down in Australia, he got really into them,
Oh.
and so like as in stuff like vitamin B in like big quantities and stuff, and like
Oh. Well, he tell that lad he should be watching his liver and kidneys because that's
yeah.
they don't report well on that. But what's fascinating about firstly, does Hims and Hers operate in Ireland? So are you telling me I can get my hands on this Wegovy here now? Just nice a few shots to my house.
I think it's mostly focused in the US,
I
but there are
think so. Yeah.
similar startups in its ilk that have
Yeah.
definitely along the route of the erectile dysfunction medicines and the hair loss medicines and all that.
Uh-huh.
There's in for a penny, in for a pound on a bunch of them around Europe as well. But I
Right.
think the HIMS is definitely focused on the US. So all
The-
that happened on Friday, which was bad enough, down 30% in a day. No
wow.
rest for the weary. Fast forward to Monday, and then the company had
Mm.
to report earnings in the
Oh,
wake of this.
right.
So, and like it's funny because you're reporting on Q4 and
Yeah.
2024 as a whole, and you're looking back on what was obviously an unbelievable year because of all I've just said and this huge catalyst to the business in terms of the weight loss drugs. But essentially, everything was up and to the right. Revenue was up 95%, profits up about 2,000% from
Wow.
obviously a low base. I think it went from 2 million to 40 million or something like that, or 1 million to
Wow.
20 million. And then as well for 2025, management dropped huge guidance as well. So I think it's revenue was set to grow 59% year over year.
Mm.
However, here's where the huge caveat comes: 725 million of that revenue of
Mm.
2.3 to 2.4, so about 30%, was falling under its weight loss division.
Right, right.
Yeah. And so Hims themselves have pointed out, like, the FDA have made this a lot more difficult for us to achieve this target now, with the fact that the
Yeah.
compounding the compounding opportunity is being taken away.
Oh, yeah.
They, that doesn't mean that their weight loss opportunity is gone, but it does mean that it's going to come a lot more difficult. So they're looking at alternatives. They already have an oral pill, which is about 70% as effective as the injectable
Hmm. Oh,
semaglutides of GLP-1s. They're planning to offer a generic, I'm going to say this wrong, liraglutide, which is another version of a GLP-1 that's injected daily. Um,
daily. That's a bit of a trauma, isn't it? Giving yourself an injection every day.
yeah, but that's how they're all administered.
Oh, I thought semaglutide or whatever you call it, the Wegovy and Ozempic. I thought they were once a week or once a month. No.
I'm not sure. Yeah,
Ugh.
maybe I'm wrong, but they're
I
all
think that
definitely
put a lot of people.
injected, anyways.
Yeah, put a lot of
Um,
people off, wouldn't it? Every morning you're having your cornflakes with a syringe beside you, ready to go.
yeah. So the big question now, I guess, is whether Hims can keep these customers
Mm.
they've acquired, because I think customers are up like
Mm.
45% year over year.
Wow.
Because you have to remember, like we talked about this, they flocked there because of the price. You know, they're
Yeah.
cost sensitive. They
Yeah, of course.
essentially couldn't afford their Wegovy or their Mounjaro prescriptions, and then Hims brought this new alternative for them.
Yeah.
So costs are very much front of mind there. And if they can settle with the therapy, say the oral pills that are 70% as effective, but 20% of the cost, the company still might have a chance to keep these customers. So the dip, the whatever 50% dip in 2 days, 3 days, could be extreme. Now I don't know. Like, maybe I'm being way too optimistic there. And it's like, hold on a second, these lads have had their golden goose ripped out of their hands, and it's kaput.
Yeah.
I probably don't know wide enough how much of the business, because we were talking about, like, the weight loss drugs are only accounting for about 30% of revenue in 2025.
Mm.
Do you know what I mean? There's still a
Mm.
big business behind that. And Dudum was emphasizing a lot of that on the earnings call as well. So
Yeah. Yeah.
that revenue, excluding the weight loss division, grew 43% year over year to 1.2 billion in revenue. It's expanding all of its health services, not just weight loss, personalized, accessible care, all of that. Subscribers were up 45% year over year. Monthly online revenue per subscriber was up 38% year over year. Average order value was up 63% year over year. So all of it is moving in the right direction.
Yeah.
And yes, the weight loss is a huge catalyst. But there is a business here aside from all of that too. Add
Yeah.
in the fact that they have a fighting chance of keeping a lot of that 725 million, we'll say, planned revenue for 2025.
Mhm.
You know, those customers immediately don't go back to Wegovy or Mounjaro now. Do you know what I mean? There
Mm.
is a good opportunity there. So yeah,
Mm.
I don't know. What do you think on the whole thing? It's weird to talk about such a, like, disastrous piece of news and be like, oh, well, maybe there's a silver lining here.
When I think about the first, I was kind of hit with a lot of thoughts. The first was I'm glad I went into a wildcard report, that the special report we wrote just over a year ago, because it's
Yeah,
enjoyed some massive returns. I think it was up
and
10x.
and
Yeah,
it's acted like a wild card.
it
more
has acted like a
more
wild card.
importantly, yeah,
But it has 10x from when we said to subscribers of whatever service it was. I think it was Invest Plus. You should buy it now, and then it's fallen back, so it's still up whatever 4, maybe 5x. So like that was one of the thoughts, emotions I was
yeah,
hit with, which was I was happy with. But really, the industry it's in seems to be um, discretionary treatments that you can self-prescribe. And whether it's you want more hair or you want less fat or whatever else, you can go and have this private consultation and get a drug that otherwise might be a little bit harder to get. And I think
yeah,
that as a movement will always exist. Like there just are conditions and things that people would rather just have a relationship just with them and a meaningless algorithm on a computer screen. So I do think their industry is not going to go away. I don't think their opportunity is going to get smaller. But what I do think is that And this is really just what I've scraped off the streets, but I'm not hearing, like, I don't know anyone who, well, I don't know anyone who takes Wegovy or any of the similars that you mentioned there. What compounding, is that what you call it? Compounds?
Compounds, yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know anyone who's taken it or because they wouldn't necessarily announce it, but I would imagine customers, patients of that product ultimately want to get off it. So it's one of those things, you want to lose weight, but you don't want to take an injection for the next 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years.
Hmm.
Probably won't. And I'm seeing some negative backlash about the product, albeit in Irish media, and people talking about how it's not uh, a pleasing product despite its benefits. So I think that its sell off is one to watch. I feel it's a little bit like Illumina. There's always going to be challenges, and I'd have it on watch list for now. Would I jump on it now because it's been sold off? No, because I think the news that you've just explained is substantial enough that it's not just a flash in the pan. Like if you take Lemonade's most recent quarter, their profit, their promise of profit this year has been set back because of the fires in, excuse me, the wildfire in LA, which was an event. It's event driven. And you can see that that path to profit has been pushed out, but it's by something that is distinct. But what you've described with hymns is not a distinct beginning, middle, and end thing. Their ability to produce these compounds, the supply of Ozempic, Wegovy, and the similars has actually no longer a struggle. Plus, I think we've advancements that a lot of people would rather not be taking injections. So I'm a bit
Yeah.
on the fence. I'm kind of lukewarm
What,
based on what you've told
what's
me.
what's interesting, you're talking about the event, because it's inversely, the event was actually the shortage of
Yes, that's true.
these weight loss drugs from Eli
And
Lilly and from
oh yeah,
Novo
you're
Nordisk.
right.
So
It was
so
a tailwind, as they say, as opposed to a
yeah,
headwind.
the probably the mindset was, I guess the mindset was, people were convincing themselves it would last a lot longer than it was.
Mm,
This
yeah,
was an inevitability that this shortage would end. And
yeah,
while the CEO is saying, well, maybe don't count all your eggs on that. Like Novo Nordisk are already threatening that it's
yeah.
could be short again on it. There are, yeah, like the excitement around it really took off, and it was
Mm. Oh, it's being
exuberant
hailed as
beyond
the
belief.
panacea for everything. I read that it cured people of nail biting. I'm not making that up.
Oh, this is semaglutide in general.
Yeah,
100%. Yeah. People quit smoking from it. People stop drinking. All this stuff. It's doing like it's obviously something to do with the
yeah,
brain's the brain's impulses.
yes, yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like it's doing something there that is really, it's mad. Like,
It really is. No, I mean, every other newspaper and publication was calling it as the panacea. Heart attacks were going down, death through morbid deaths and obesity and all these type of everything was being cured, and
yeah,
it just sounded like this is ridiculous. However, I was in with my GP in January for my annual checkup, and he got me up on the scales, and we just made a joke about the Christmas pounds were there, and I said, "Here, go on, throw us a prescription for." Wegovy, and even though he knew I was joking, he gave me a chapter and verse on why you just don't want to do that. I was like, "Come on, no, Carl, I'm joking. I don't want it. Look, come on. Do you actually think I need it? Will I have it?" So, but no, it was and it was quite interesting because he presented me with some opinions based on the patients that he's treated and given a 10 and wasn't favorable. And I guess, look, an anecdote does not make for data. My trip to my GP and a quick chat doesn't make for a business case. But my feeling on the product is that it's not going to have the same cultural relevance in 3 years. Now, hymns will figure other things like hair loss and sexual performance and weight management and all these things. Yes, they matter, and there's going to be different treatments. So I do think Hims has established itself, Hims and Hers, as the brand in that arena, and I think that's a good thing. Would I buy it now? No, not necessarily.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's tough to move away from. I just a lot of criticisms around it. Just in terms of how much of a moat does it really have beyond its brand and reach at
Yeah,
the minute as well.
yeah,
So yeah, it's an interesting one. I thought, I always say this, but the market reacts the overreacts in every direction, and I
Oh, it
think
does. Yeah.
it overreacted to the upside from May until last week, and it's overreacted to the downside from last Thursday to today as well.
Yeah.
That's just a fact. That's how it's going to go. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's an interesting one. It's funny how much coverage and adulation a stock gets just because it goes up.
Oh,
Do
yeah.
you know what I mean? Like the
Yeah.
amount of coverage I've seen on Hims because it's tripled and quadrupled and quintupled in the space of 6-9 months.
Mm, mm,
You can only talk positively about it, and people want to brag as well.
yeah.
And that feeds a lot into it too. But it's just a really interesting story, and
Yeah.
I don't think it's done yet. I think there's a lot more to play out there.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. For sure.
Yeah,
But you could argue that like Amazon in its early days sending books in the post, there was no great barrier to entry, but the real like barrier is the processes you build around a business and the customer experience that you develop. So I wonder if the Hims customer experience is just knockout good. I haven't looked
yeah.
into that, not by any stretch, but you can imagine that if you had a very, very good experience with one product, you'd have the halo effect and find customers are buying the next thing and the next thing till they're buying their toothpaste off you.
Potentially, yeah.
I want whiter teeth. Oh, we got the toothpaste for you. So yeah,
That could be the next expansion for him.
yeah.
Um,
But they're going to do it with a new technology like CRISPR. It's like we have an injection that will make your teeth whiter. It's like I want that. Just
yeah,
fill
it's
in this
true.
form, and we'll get it prescribed for you.
You'll never have to floss again.
No.
Okay, before we finish off the show, I just want to come in with some good news, actually, which
Oh.
is rare sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
So we talked about this ad nauseum on the show about the Irish tax system around investments and ETFs in particular, the exit tax and deemed disposal. So Finance Minister Pascal Donohoe, Pascal, we all know him.
Yeah.
He's promised to ease the exit tax on ETFs in time for budget 2026.
Ah, good man, Pascal. You listen to the podcast.
So we we talked about this review last year. The previous finance minister, Michael McGrath, undertook a review in which essentially looked at the retail investing landscape in Ireland, and it came back in October of last year with suggestions essentially that said it should bring down exit tax on ETFs to 33% to match capital gains tax, which is still pretty high, but a win is a win. But I would suggest much more importantly than lowering the exit tax, was the review recommended getting rid of deemed disposal rule, which is essentially brings about a taxable event every 8 years. Um, which is, we discussed this. We've had
Yeah.
our rants.
Yeah.
You're taxing unrealized gains. However bad a 41% tax is, and it is fairly shocking, it's the lesser of two evils in that scenario because you're still giving investors the opportunity to compound over 30, even 40 years, depending on your time horizon. And yes, there will be a big tax bill at the end when you start selling out, but you'll also have made your money. If you introduce that taxable event every 8 years, it's a complete and utter deterrent. And I would suggest that you've not, like, you've made it almost impossible to invest in ETFs in Ireland because
Mm-hmm.
you've taken all the positive elements out of it with the taxable event every 8 years. You've ruined your chance of compounding. So that's, I believe, the much more important aspect of that review and the recommendations from it. So yeah, they're also recommending to get rid of the 1% life assurance levy and then to allow investors to offset losses, say from one ETF to another, which you can do with stocks, but you couldn't do with ETFs because for whatever reason, Brian Cowen back in 2000 and what just decided ETFs were the devil,
Yeah.
and the Irish tax system hasn't done anything about it since. I guess it's a bit sad we're getting excited about this. Like, it's like coming out of the dark ages a bit. I mean, it's a huge development in terms of
Mm.
Ireland's investing landscape, but we're only catching up slightly to the UK and the US in terms of being or Sweden or a
Mm.
bunch of other places in terms of like making it an investor friendly country.
Yeah.
Do you know?
Oh, yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's investor friendly in certain segments like American multinational corporates. But do you know, wait to hear this. I think we should try and get Pascal Donoghue on our podcast because well, for all the obvious reasons, he wasn't only the Minister for Finance for Ireland, he was the Minister for Finance for Europe. And
Hmm.
he is, whether you like him or not, or agree with his politics or not, he's a very intelligent guy. And actually, I'm meeting the Taoiseach, he's like the vice president, if you like, of Ireland on Thursday, a guy called Simon Harris, at an event. And I was telling Anne Marie yesterday, I was saying, oh, I'm going to meet Simon Harris on Thursday. I better go buy a new shirt because Simon Harris deserves to see extra white shirts. And she was like, oh, get him on the podcast. I said, oh, yeah, I'll do that. That's a good idea. I'll ask him will he appear on the podcast. But I think I'll say to him, hey, do you actually know Pascal Donoghue? And he'll be like, of course I do. It's in the next office to me. Any chance of an intro? So I think I'm going to go for Pascal Donoghue. I think it would be a very interesting podcast. Now, whether or not he's interested, I have to pitch that one well. But like,
Yeah,
yeah.
I'd say the pitch would have to be pretty good. He's a busy man.
Eh,
I'll read
eh,
out.
busy enough.
I'll read out the quote from the man himself. So he said, "The program for government has committed to progress and published an implementation plan for consideration in budget 2026, taking into consideration the fund's review recommendations to unlock retail investment and opportunities to grow the sector in Ireland. Work on delivering this commitment has already begun." And look,
Mm,
I think it's great. We've been lamenting it for the last two,
yeah,
3 years on this pod
yeah,
of how difficult they've made it in terms of basically preventing the average Irish person from becoming an investor. And I say that in the
yeah,
sense of individual stock picking is a niche. Like we know that. Like
yeah.
the average Joe Blogs couldn't be arsed reading through 10Ks
No.
and following a company and doing all that due diligence and really like you have to immerse yourself in this stuff. Whereas that person had no access to the stock market before this because the ETF
Mm,
taxation was so prohibitive.
mm,
Now they have this hands off passive approach where they can just set up a direct debit, comes out the day you get paid, 200, 300, 400, whatever you can kind of spare essentially
yeah.
can go into the one of the greatest wealth building machines we've
Yes.
ever seen,
Yeah.
which is, and it doesn't have to be the US stock market, but the US stock market
Hmm.
has been the most successful. But we can go into a world index fund, emerging markets fund, whatever else, something where it's completely hands off. You don't have to think about it. Literally come back in 30 years and fully realize the power of compounding. And I think it's amazing news and it's about time. Look, we can get greedy. We can look for an ISA or a Roth IRA style product to come out. Maybe it will eventually. Maybe there'll be more emphasis on the retail investor in Ireland. But in general, really positive news. Hopefully, everything said in that article and everything Pascal Donoghue plans does make it into the budget. I would be disgusted if they gave themselves a pat on the back for, say, lowering exit tax to 41% from 41 to 33, but keeping deemed disposal or something like that. I think
Mm.
deemed disposal is 100% the number one enemy here. But yeah, we'll see how it plays out. But fingers crossed it all goes as intended.
Yeah, fingers crossed is right. I think it'll be just a great positive movement, and we can stop rabbiting on about it, so our American listeners can kind of click back in and go, yeah, they're talking about. Oh, I tell us another joke about Ireland. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, agreed. I'm gonna try and get him on the podcast. I think it'll make for a very
Yeah.
interesting conversation. You can interview him. You're smarter than me.
Yeah. And it's good for business as well because this is going to create more stock investors. Do you
Yes.
know?
Oh, it is. Yeah, no, it is true.
100%. Like you're giving them these options and that will introduce them to the world of stock
Mm,
investing.
mm,
Yeah.
mm. No doubt about it. Well, look, we're preaching to the converted. I'd say most of our
It's true.
listeners are not in agreement.
Yeah, I'd hope so at this
Yeah,
stage.
yeah.
After all we talked about it.
If they listen
Uh,
to 51 minutes of you and me waffling on about Illumina and hims and hers and now manage to listen through to this bit, like honestly, do write in if you've listened to every word we've ever uttered.
okay, I think we'll leave it there. We've been talking for long enough. Emmet, thank you for joining me and thank you everyone for listening in. We'll talk to you next week.